A monopoly in pi omega lambda epsilon nu πωλεῖν exists when a specific person or enterprise is the only supplier of a particular commodity. Monopolies are thus characterized by a lack of economic competition to produce the good or service, a lack of viable substitute goods, and the possibility of a high monopoly price well above the firm's marginal cost that leads to a high monopoly profit. The verb monopolize or monopolize refers to the process by which a company gains the ability to raise prices or exclude competitors. In economics, a monopoly is a single seller. In law, a monopoly is a business entity that has significant market power, that is, the power to charge overly high prices. Although monopolies may be big businesses, size is not a characteristic of a monopoly. A small business may still have the power to raise prices in a small industry. A monopoly is distinguished from a monopsony, in which there is only one buyer of a product or service. A monopoly may also have monopsony, control of a sector of a market. Monopolies, monosonies and oligopolies are all situations such that one or a few of the entities have market power and therefore interact with their customers, suppliers and the other companies in ways that leave market interactions distorted. Monopolies can be established by a government, formed naturally, or formed by integration. In many jurisdictions, competition laws restrict monopolies. Holding a dominant position or a monopoly of a market is often not illegal in itself. However, certain categories of behavior can be considered abusive and therefore incur legal sanctions when business is dominant. A government-granted monopoly or legal monopoly, by contrast, is sanctioned by the state, often to provide an incentive to invest in a risky venture or enrich a domestic interest group. Patents, copyrights, and trademarks are sometimes used as examples of government-granted monopolies. The government may also reserve a venture for itself, thus forming a government monopoly. Market structures. In economics, the idea of monopoly will be important for the study of management structures, which directly concerns normative aspects of economic competition, and provides the basis for topics such as industrial organization and economics of regulation. There are four basic types of market structures by traditional economic analysis: perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly and monopoly. A monopoly is a structure in which a single supplier produces and sells a given product. If there is a single seller in a certain industry and there are not any close substitutes for the product, then the market structure is that of a pure monopoly. Sometimes, there are many sellers in an industry or there exist many close substitutes for the goods being produced, but nevertheless companies retain some market power. This is termed monopolistic competition, whereas in oligopoly the companies interact strategically. In general, the main results from this theory compare price-fixing methods across market structures, analyze the effect of a certain structure on welfare, and vary technological demand assumptions in order to assess the consequences for an abstract model of society. Most economic textbooks follow the practice of carefully explaining the perfect competition model, mainly because of its usefulness to understand departures from it, the boundaries of what constitutes a market, and what doesn't, are relevant distinctions to make in economic analysis. In a general equilibrium context, a good is a specific concept entangling geographical and time-related characteristics. Most studies of market structure lax a little their definition of a good, allowing for more flexibility at the identification of substitute goods. Therefore, one can find an economic analysis of the market of grapes in Russia, for example, which is not a market in the strict sense of general equilibrium theory monopoly. Characteristics: profit maximizer, maximizes profits. Price maker, decides the price of the good or product to be sold, but does so by determining the quantity in order to demand the price desired by the firm. High barriers. Other sellers are unable to enter the market of the monopoly. Single seller. In a monopoly, there is one seller of the good that produces all the output. Therefore, the whole market is being served by a single company, and for practical purposes, the company is the same as the industry. Price discrimination. A monopolist can change the price and quality of the product. He or she sells higher quantities, charging a lower price for the product, in a very elastic market, and sells lower quantities, charging a higher price, in a less elastic market. Monopoly versus competitive markets. While monopoly and perfect competition mark the extremes of market structures, there is some similarity. The cost functions are the same. Both monopolies and perfectly competitive companies minimize cost and maximize profit. The shutdown decisions are the same. Both are assumed to have perfectly competitive factors markets. There are distinctions, some of the more important of which are as follows. Marginal revenue and price. In a perfectly competitive market, price equals marginal cost. In a monopolistic market, however, price is set above marginal cost. Product differentiation. There is zero product differentiation in a perfectly competitive market. Every product is perfectly homogeneous and a perfect substitute for any other. With a monopoly, there is great to absolute product differentiation in the sense that there is no available substitute for a monopolized good. The monopolist is the sole supplier of the good in question. A customer either buys from the monopolizing entity on its terms or does without. Number of competitors. PC markets are populated by an infinite number of buyers and sellers. Monopoly involves a single seller. Barriers to entry. Barriers to entry are factors and circumstances that prevent entry into market by would-be competitors and limit new companies from operating in, expanding within the market. PC markets have free entry and exit. There are no barriers to entry or exit competition. Monopolies have relatively high barriers to entry. The barriers must be strong enough to prevent or discourage any potential competitor from entering the market. Elasticity of demand. The price elasticity of demand is the percentage change of demand caused by a 1% change of relative price. A successful monopoly would have a relatively inelastic demand curve. A low coefficient of elasticity is indicative of effective barriers to entry. A PC company has a perfectly elastic demand curve. The coefficient of elasticity for a perfectly competitive demand curve is infinite. Excess profits. Excess or positive profits are profit more than the normal expected return on investment. A PC company can make excess profits in the short term, but excess profits attract competitors, which can enter the market freely and decrease prices, eventually reducing excess profits to zero. A monopoly can preserve excess profits because barriers to entry prevent competitors from entering the market. Profit maximization. A PC company maximizes profits by producing such that price equals marginal costs. A monopoly maximizes profits by producing where marginal revenue equals marginal costs. The rules are not equivalent. The demand curve for a PC company is perfectly elastic, flat. The demand curve is identical to the average revenue curve and the price line. Since the average revenue curve is constant, the marginal revenue curve is also constant and equals the demand curve. Average revenue is the same as price. Thus, the price line is also identical to the demand curve. In sum, D equals R equals Mr equals P. P max quantity, price and profit. If a monopolist obtains control of a formerly perfectly competitive industry, the monopolist would increase prices, reduce production, and realize positive economic profits. Supply curve. In a perfectly competitive market, there is a well-defined supply function with a one-to-one relationship between price and quantity supplied. In a monopolistic market, no such supply relationship exists. A monopolist cannot trace a short-term supply curve because for a given price there is not a unique quantity supplied. As Pindyck and Rubenfeld note, a change in demand can lead to changes in prices with no change in output. Changes in output with no change in price or both. Monopolies produce where marginal revenue equals marginal costs. For a specific demand curve, the supply curve would be the price-quantity combination at the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. If the demand curve shifted, the marginal revenue curve would shift as well, and a new equilibrium and supply point would be established. The locus of these points would not be a supply curve in any conventional sense. The most significant distinction between a PC company and a monopoly is that the monopoly has a downward-sloping demand curve rather than the perceived perfectly elastic curve of the PC company. Practically all the variations mentioned above relate to this fact. If there is a downward-sloping demand curve, then by necessity, there is a distinct marginal revenue curve. The implications of this fact are best made manifest with a linear demand curve. Assume that the inverse demand curve is of the form x equals a minus by. Then the total revenue curve is tr equals I minus by 2, and the marginal revenue curve is thus Mr equals a minus 2 by. From this several things are evident. First, the marginal revenue curve has the same y-intercept as the inverse demand curve. Second, the slope of the marginal revenue curve is twice that of the inverse demand curve. Third, the x-intercept of the marginal revenue curve is half that of the inverse demand curve. What is not quite so evident is that the marginal revenue curve is below the inverse demand curve at all points. Since all companies maximize profits by equating Mr and MC, it must be the case that at the profit-maximizing quantity Mr and MC are less than price, which further implies that a monopoly produces less quantity at a higher price than if the market were perfectly competitive. The fact that a monopoly has a downward-sloping demand curve means that the relationship between total revenue and output for a monopoly is much different than that of competitive companies. Total revenue equals price times quantity. A competitive company has a perfectly elastic demand curve, meaning that total revenue is proportional to output. Thus, the total revenue curve for a competitive company is a ray with a slope equal to the market price. A competitive company can sell all the output it desires at the market price. For a monopoly to increase sales, it must reduce price. Thus, the total revenue curve for a monopoly is a parabola that begins at the origin and reaches a maximum value, then continuously decreases until total revenue is again zero. Total revenue has its maximum value when the slope of the total revenue function is zero. The slope of the total revenue function is marginal revenue. So the revenue maximizing quantity and price occur when Mr equals zero. For example, assume that the monopoly's demand function is P equals 50 minus 2Q. The total revenue function would be TR equals 50Q minus 2Q2, and marginal revenue would be 50 minus 4Q. Setting marginal revenue equal to zero, we have so the revenue maximizing quantity for the monopoly is 12.5 units and the revenue maximizing price is 25. A company with a monopoly does not experience price pressure from competitors, although it may experience pricing pressure from potential competition. If a company increases prices too much, then others may enter the market if they are able to provide the same good, or a substitute, at a lesser price. The idea that monopolies in markets with easy entry need not be regulated against is known as the revolution in monopoly theory. A monopolist can extract only one premium, and getting into complementary markets does not pay. That is, the total profits a monopolist could earn if it sought to leverage its monopoly in one market by monopolizing a complementary market are equal to the extra profits it could earn anyway by charging more for the monopoly product itself. However, the one monopoly profit theorem is not true if customers in the monopoly good are stranded or poorly informed, or if the tied good has high fixed costs. A pure monopoly has the same economic rationality of perfectly competitive companies, i.e., to optimize a profit function given some constraints. by the assumptions of increasing marginal costs, exogenous inputs prices, and control concentrated on a single agent or entrepreneur. The optimal decision is to equate the marginal cost and marginal revenue of production. Nonetheless, a pure monopoly can, unlike a competitive company, alter the market price for its own convenience. A decrease of production results in a higher price. In the economics jargon, it is said that pure monopolies have a downward-sloping demand. An important consequence of such behavior is worth noticing. Typically, a monopoly selects a higher price and lesser quantity of output than a price-taking company. Again, less is available at a higher price. The inverse elasticity rule. A monopoly chooses that price that maximizes the difference between total revenue and total cost. The basic markup rule can be expressed as P equals 1 PED. The markup rules indicate that the ratio between profit margin and the price is inversely proportional to the price elasticity of demand. The implication of the rule is that the more elastic the demand for the product, the less pricing power the monopoly has. Market power is the ability to increase the product's price above marginal cost without losing all customers. Perfectly competitive companies have zero market power when it comes to setting prices. All companies of a PC market are price takers. The price is set by the interaction of demand and supply at the market or aggregate level. Individual companies simply take the price determined by the market and produce that quantity of output that maximizes the company's profits. If a PC company attempted to increase prices above the market level, all its customers would abandon the company and purchase at the market price from other companies. A monopoly has considerable, although not unlimited, market power. A monopoly has the power to set prices or quantities, although not both. A monopoly is a price maker. The monopoly is the market and prices are set by the monopolist based on his circumstances and not the interaction of demand and supply. The two primary factors determining monopoly market power are the company's demand curve and its cost structure. Market power is the ability to affect the terms and conditions of exchange so that the price of a product is set by a single company. Although a monopoly's market power is great, it is still limited by the demand side of the market. A monopoly has a negatively sloped demand curve, not a perfectly inelastic curve. Consequently, any price increase will result in the loss of some customers.